The sun hung in the sky like a vulture, unmoving and cruel. It poured down on the dust-choked square of Dry Valley, bleaching the wooden planks pale and curling the edges of the auction flyers nailed to every post. Heat shimmered off the cracked earth in waves, turning the air itself into something thick and heavy, like breath that didn't want to leave the lung. She stood barefoot on the wooden block, feet blistered, dress too small and torn at the sleeve. The girl couldn't have been more than 10, though her eyes looked older. Dust clung to her calves, her mouth trembled, but she'd long stopped making sounds, only a dry rasp now, like wind scraping bone. She had cried at first, screamed for her mother until her throat went raw. But nobody answered. Only the auctioneer did, his voice high and nasal, cutting through the crowd like a butcher's hook. Virgin girl, strong arms, not yet broken. Good for field or house, whichever you need. Men adjusted their hats. Women turned their eyes away. Some boys, no older than she, watched with a detached sort of curiosity. A dog barked from somewhere in the shade, as if trying to be heard over the bidding that never came. No one raised a hand. She blinked into the light, her cheeks wet with old tears. Her lip bled where she'd bitten it. Every few seconds, her chest hiccuped with the kind of breath that comes from trying not to cry again. She looked out across the people, past the boots and dust, searching faces for something familiar. Nothing. Her mother had vanished somewhere before the border crossing, swallowed by a wagon raid or fever, or simply the apathy of the desert. Now only silence answered her. "Do I hear $1?" the auctioneer called again, his tone faltering. Nothing but the creak of a porch swing and the shuffle of boots. "Half?" The girl wobbled slightly. Her legs had been tied all night, and now the ropes bit deeper into her skin, purple welts peeking from beneath the hem of her shift. Her chin dropped. She wasn't crying anymore, just waiting. Her small hands clenched into fists, behind her back, perhaps the only part of her still resisting. That's when the dust stirred near the edge of the crowd. He hadn't said a word the entire time. Boots caked in mud, a duster faded by too many suns, and a felt hat pulled low enough to cast his face in shadow. He stood still as a tombstone for a moment, then stepped forward. Slow, steady, no rustle of urgency or hesitation. Just the soft crunch of his steps pressing deep into the dirt. Someone whispered, "That's him. The rancher from up north. Lives alone." The girl didn't see him at first. Her head had dropped too low. But she heard the quiet. Even the auctioneer stalled. The man didn't ask questions, didn't look to the crowd for approval. He climbed the 2 steps to the platform, like it was a grave he'd been walking to his whole life. Then he stopped just in front of her, and without a word, he reached out. A hand, weathered, calloused. A hand that smelled faintly of leather and smoke and horses. She flinched at first. Then she looked up. No words were said. Not then. Not when he handed over the coins. Not when he took the rope from the auctioneer and untied her wrists himself, slow and careful, as if he were afraid she might break from just the touch. Not even when he lifted her off the platform and she buried her face in his coat because she didn't know where else to hide her shame. His hand stayed on her shoulder the whole walk through town, never pushing, just there, solid, real. And in that silence, something changed. Not for the town, not for the sun or the dust or the crowd that quickly lost interest, but for her. Because in the heat of that day, under the gaze of 100 strangers, a man who said nothing had seen her, had reached out and held her hand when no one else would. And somehow, that made all the difference. The wagon groaned beneath their weight, the wheels creaking like old bones as it rolled away from Dry Valley. He sat up front, reins loose in one hand, the other resting on his thigh. She sat behind him on a folded blanket that smelled of hay and tobacco, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the dust trail they left behind. No one had spoken since the auction. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was thick, full of things unsaid but deeply felt. The land stretched flat and bare, endless in all directions. Mesquite trees hunched like old men against the horizon. A hawk circled above, high and solitary. The sun pressed down harder the further they went, but the wagon's slow rhythm lulled her into something like safety. She didn't ask where they were going, didn't ask his name, just watched his back, the shape of it, solid under the worn brown coat, the curve of his neck, the way the wind tugged at the brim of his hat, but never managed to move it. It was late when they reached his land. The sky had turned amber, the wind cooler, and the shadows long and stretching. His ranch was quiet, modest, a small house of weathered planks and a barn that leaned slightly west as if tired, a water pump out front, a corral with no horses, just space, empty, quiet space. He stopped the wagon, climbed down, and turned to help her. She hesitated, then let him. His grip was firm but gentle-like, lifting something fragile, not yet sure if it was broken. Inside the house smelled of pine wood and dust. A single table, a bed in the corner, a chair that creaked when he sat. He pointed to a small basin, then set a tin cup under the water pump and brought it to her. She drank greedily, coughed, drank again. He sat down, watching her in a way that wasn't staring, just noticing, like he was trying to memorize her shape, like someone might do with a broken thing before they try to fix it. Still, no words. She looked at her own hands, filthy, fingers raw from rope. She scrubbed them in the basin till the water turned brown. He brought over a towel and left it beside her. Then, just as quiet, he turned and began lighting a small fire in the hearth. Later, he placed a tin plate of beans and cornbread on the table and gestured for her to sit. She did, carefully. Every bite felt strange, her body remembering food again after too many days without it. Halfway through the meal, her voice cracked through the silence. "Why'd you buy me?" He didn't look up right away, just stirred his beans slowly, as if considering. Finally he said, "Didn't seem right, what they were doing." That was all. No speech, no pity, just truth. She looked at him, really looked, and something in her chest unclenched. Not all the way, but enough to breathe. That night, he gave her the bed and took the chair. She curled up under the blanket like a small animal, uncertain whether to sleep or stay ready to run. But before her eyes closed, she whispered into the dark, "I don't know your name." A pause. Then, from the chair, his voice low and rough, "Eli." Another pause. Then, softer. "Yours?" She hadn't said it in days. Weeks, maybe. She let it roll in her mouth before releasing it. "Hattie." Eli didn't say anything more. But in the stillness, something passed between them, like a seed planted in dry earth, waiting on rain. Outside, the wind moved through the grass, quiet as breath. The morning came pale and cold. Mist clung low over the field, like breath not yet exhaled. Hattie woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of chickens scratching outside the window. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the car empty now, a folded blanket on the seat, and remembered. She moved slow, her body sore from sleeping too deeply on a mattress too soft after so many nights on hard ground. Her feet touched the floor like she was testing the world again. Eli was outside, splitting wood. The axe rose and fell with quiet precision, each thud sharp and final. He didn't look up when she stepped onto the porch, but he knew she was there. There was a plate on the table by the doorbread, still warm, and a hard-boiled egg. She ate quietly, watching him work. The land stretched wide around them, wheat-colored and still, like the world had paused just to breathe. When he finally paused, wiping his brow with a sleeve, she asked, "What do you want me to do?" He turned toward her. His expression was unreadable, creased by sun and wind, eyes the color of ashwood. "You rest," he said. "You're not here to earn your keep. You're here to heal." She didn't know what to do with those words. They felt too big, too kind, like a blanket she didn't know how to wear. Later, he handed her a brush and pointed to the old mare in the corral. "She likes company," he said. Hattie walked toward the fence, slowly, her small hands trembling around the brush. The mare blinked at her with dark, patient eyes, and when Hattie reached out, the animal leaned in. That small, wordless trust undid something in her. She brushed for hours. At sundown, Eli handed her a tin cup of milk and sat beside her on the porch. The sky was pink and gray now, the first stars peeking through. "She ever coming back?" he asked softly, not looking at her. Hattie didn't answer right away. Her fingers tightened around the cup. "She said she'd be right back. She said not to cry." Eli nodded slowly. Mine said the same. She looked at him. He didn't offer more, but she knew. Knew by the way he stared at the horizon, like it owed him something. Knew by the silence in the house, the way the plates were mismatched, but always just one fork out. They sat there until the sky went full dark. Neither spoke again, but the quiet wasn't empty. It was full of understanding of pain recognized but not pressed upon. The kind of quiet that only comes from people who have been hurt the same way. That night, as she lay in the bed with the stars pressing against the windows, she whispered her mother's name into the pillow. She didn't know if Eli heard, but in the dark, the floor creaked once near the door, and somehow she slept easier. Days passed like pages turning in a book she didn't know how to read. Each morning brought the same cold mist, the same smell of coffee, the same quiet strength moving through the house. Eli didn't ask questions. He didn't touch her unless to hand her something: bread, a coat, the handle of a shovel. But in each act, there was a kind of gentleness that spoke louder than word. Hattie learned the rhythm of the ranch: when to feed the chickens, how to boil water over the stove without spilling, which fence posts needed mending. The work steadied her, filled her hands with something other than shaking. One afternoon, while they were digging post holes near the creek, a storm moved in swift and sudden. The sky turned slate. The wind tore through the grass like a warning. Hattie dropped the spade as thunder cracked above. She flinched, eyes wide, breath catching in her throat. Her body stiffened like a struck deer. Rain began to fall in fat, cold drops. Eli was beside her in an instant. He didn't grab her or shout. He just placed a hand on her shoulder, light and firm. "You're all right," he said low. She shook her head, chest heaving. He knelt in front of her, dirt on his knees, rain in his beard. "Ain't no one here but me. Storm'll pass." Her lip quivered. I thought it was." "I know," he said, and he did. They waited there, crouched together beneath the overhang of an old elm, the rain soaking their clothes. He didn't let go. Not until her breathing evened out. Not until the thunder faded like a memory. Afterward, back in the house, he gave her his coat to wear while her dress dried by the fire. She sat curled in it, knees pulled to her chest. The coat smelled of sweat and pine and horses' solid things. Safe thing. She looked over at him, elbows resting on the table, mending a worn glove with slow, practiced stitches. "You lost someone?" she asked. He nodded without looking up. "Wife. Long time ago." She waited, but that was all he said. She nodded. "Me too, Mama." The words came easier than she thought they would. "She sold me, I think. Or traded me. I don't know. One minute we were together then." Her voice cracked. She bit it down. Ellie didn't press, just kept stitching. "But you bought me," she whispered. "Why?" He set the glove down. Met her eyes for the first time all day. "Didn't buy you," he said. "I freed you." Hattie's breath caught. Outside, the storm had passed. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. Inside, the fire crackled. A girl warmed her toes by the hearth. A man sat nearby, not close enough to trap her, but close enough to matter. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a possession. She felt like a person. Spring came quiet and slow, like it had to tiptoe back into their lives. The fields turned soft and green. Shoots of wild mustard bloomed along the fence lines. Birds came back, and so did Hattie's voice, at first in hums, then in questions, and eventually in laughter. Not loud, not often, but enough to make Eli pause in whatever he was doing and look her way. He built her a small bed frame from pine one weekend, the kind with carvings on the posts and joints that didn't squeak. Didn't say it was for her, just left it by the window where the sunlight hit in the morning. She ran her fingers along the edges and said nothing, but that night she didn't curl up in a ball. She stretched out, arms above her head, like she finally had room to dream. Some evenings, she read aloud to him from the old books, stacked in the pantry, mostly tattered farmers' almanacs and yellowed dime novels. She stumbled over the words, but he never corrected her, just leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded, listening like the stories were rain on a roof. Then came the day she fell off the horse. It wasn't a bad fall, just a startled colt and a patch of uneven ground. She landed hard on her side, the wind knocked from her, her dress torn. Eli reached her in seconds. "You all right?" She tried to sit up, winced. "Nothing broken," she gasped. "Just hurts." He helped her up with careful hands. No panic, no fuss, just steady strength. But later, while she lay on the porch bench with her ribs bandaged and her pride stung worse than the bruises, she asked, "Did you ever have a daughter?" Eli hesitated, then nodded once. "Rosie." She watched him for a moment, the way his mouth tensed around her name. "What happened?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, where the sky met the hills in a thin, silver line. "Fever took her. Same week her mama passed." He said it like laying down a stone heavy, but already carried too long to drop now. Hattie looked down at her hands. "I ain't Rosie." "No," he said, "and I ain't asking you to be." She nodded slowly, but something in her chest twisted warm grief, wrapped around comfort, around something older than both. That night, after the fire had dimmed and the wind turned chill again, Hattie did something she hadn't dared since the auction. She crossed the room to where Eli sat, a book open but unread in his lap. She stood there, small and barefoot, in the too big nightshirt he'd found her weeks ago. Then she laid her hand gently on his. He looked up, startled. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. He covered her hand with his. The room was quiet, but the kind of quiet that felt like safety. Summer settled in thick and slow, draping itself over the land like a heavy quilt. Days began earlier now, chores, done before the sun reached high enough to blister the skin, meals eaten in silence that wasn't awkward but worn in, like old leather. Hattie had grown stronger. The hollows in her cheeks filled out, her steps steadier, her hands surer with a shovel, a bridle, a skillet. She no longer flinched when someone raised their voice in town. She even haggled once at the dry goods store, to Eli's quiet amusement. But it was the letter that changed everything. It came wrapped in oilskin, stamped from Arizona territory, addressed to Eli Lang. He didn't open it right away, just stood on the porch, the envelope limp in his hand, jaw tight. Hattie watched from the edge of the barn, hay clinging to her skirt. She didn't ask. She had learned that sometimes silence gives more comfort than questions. That night, after dinner, Eli sat with the letter beside him on the table for a long time. His hand rested on it like it might fly away. Finally, he opened it. Read it once, twice, then folded it again and placed it down. "It's about Rosie," he said. Hattie froze. "They found her grave, south of Flagstaff, some missionary town, marked with her name. Said she was sick near 2 weeks before she passed. He didn't cry, just sat still, like a man watching the last train disappear over the horizon. Then he looked at Hattie. I thought she was still out there. That maybe. His voice broke, only for a moment. Hattie came to him quietly and put her arms around his shoulders. He didn't move at first, but then his hand came up, heavy and warm, resting at her waist. I'm sorry, she whispered. I wish I could have met her. She'd have liked you, he said softly. She was strong too. They sat like that for a long time. Two people holding grief not as a burden, but as a memory shaped into kindness. Later, under the stars, Hattie stood barefoot in the grass behind the house, looking up at the sky. I thought nobody'd ever want me, she said, not knowing if Eli was still behind her. Like I was used up, too broken. She felt him come up beside her. You're not broken, he said. She turned to him, eyes shining, the kind of shine that comes not from tears, but from something rebuilding in the ruins. Eli, can I stay? He met her chaza. As long as you want, Hattie. She took his hand, and this time it was her who held his. The wind rustled through the wheat, and somewhere in the night, a coyote cried not in mourning, but in song. The harvest came golden and thick, bending the wheat like prayer. Every morning, the fields shimmered under the rising sun, and every evening, the land glowed with the kind of quiet only the honest have the patience to earn. Hattie had grown tall. Not in stature as he was still slight, but in presence. The girl who once couldn't lift her head at auction now walked the rows with calloused hands and sun-browned arms, sleeves rolled and eyes steady. She smiled more often, laughed louder, and no longer asked if she was in the way. Eli still didn't speak much, but his silence had changed. It wasn't a wall now, but a porch, a place you could sit beside. He built her a second pair of boots, taught her how to mend tack, how to shoot straight, how to judge a horse's health from the way it breathed. He trusted her, and in every shared glance, every half-nod over supper, that trust deepened into something neither dared name. One evening, after the last of the hay was stacked in the barn and the sky had gone orange at the edges, they sat on the porch with chipped mugs of coffee in their hands. You ever think about leaving? Hattie asked, watching the wind pull at the grass. Sometimes, Eli said. But I don't. Why not? He took a sip. Because nothing out there calls me more than this does. She turned her face toward him. What is this? He looked at her. Just looked. Long enough that her cheeks flushed under the weight of it. Home, he said. Her breath caught. The word felt big, heavy, sacred. She nodded once, then looked down at her hands. I used to imagine my mama would come back, that she'd say she made a mistake, and she was sorry, and we'd start over somewhere. But then I stopped hoping. It hurt less. Eli reached over, slow and careful, and placed his hand over hers. She ain't coming back, Hattie, he said gently. But that don't mean you're alone. A breeze stirred the porch. Somewhere, a barn owl hooted from the rafters. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a long time, they just sat there, the stars rising like promises overhead. That night, she dreamed not of being lost or chased or forgotten. She dreamed of wheat fields, of strong hands holding hairs, of a table with 2 plates, of a man who never asked her to speak but always listened when she did. And when she woke, heart full, breath steady, she whispered his name into the morning light. Pa.